Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so today I'm gonna briefly gloss over Registry Editor, and then we're gonna go over some service practice. Okay, so the Windows Registry is a system that stores the basic settings for the computer. Oh, I should share this presentation first. Okay, so the registry is basically a system that stores a bunch of low-level settings for the Windows computer, and it does this in a hierarchical structure. So it contains settings for every single application that your computer uses. And the registry is made up of these things called keys and values. Keys are similar to folders, and in the registry editor, they actually show up as folders. And then values are similar to files, and they're basically like the specific settings. And to open registry editor, you do Windows R to open up the Run tab, and you type in regedit. Yeah. Okay. So as mentioned before, the registry contains a bunch of keys and values, and each user has their own hive, which is a group of keys and values that is specific to the user. So when a new user logs into the computer, a new hive is created for that user. And when you open up the registry, you can see there's 5 different folders, which are listed here, and each of these is responsible for um, like specific settings for the computer. So yeah, HKey current user, for example, would store everything that is related to the user that is currently logged on. And if you click through the settings, you can see on the values, which I should share my VM. Okay, so these folders are the keys, and then these are the values. Um, and all of these values have there's a bunch of different types of these values. So you have binary values. Um, you have D word, which is double word. You have SC, which are strings, and you have binary again, which is just binary data. To edit these registry values, you right click on the value name and you click modify, and you can enter in the new value here. You can also import and export in these registry values by using the import and export functions. So if I wanted to export these settings, I just have to export it, and then I can save it as a .reg file. And if I wanted to import in some files, all I have to do is do the same thing, but instead of exporting, I'm going to press import, and then you select your reg file. Okay, so that was it for registry. Typically, there aren't going to be that many points for the registry because a vast majority of the settings in here are managed by group policy as well. So if you configure the group policy well, all of these things should likely be configured as well. But there are sometimes some specific settings that you can find in the registry. If you want to learn more about the registry, you can of course go to the Microsoft official documentation, and all the sys benchmarks contain both like what you should do in group policy, and also how you can configure that same setting using registry editor. Okay, I've got these pretty like really broad questions. this is just the practice, like some things that you might do with securing these services. So we already went over the three services I'm about to talk about. So we have SMB, Active Directory, and IIS. So just take like the next 5 minutes or so and try to research some specific settings you can do. For SMB, there's only like a few settings uh to configure, but we'll review how to configure those. Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you guys 5 minutes. Okay, I know that wasn't 5 minutes, but I think that should be enough for SMB. Okay, so we went over these a few weeks ago. Um, Basically, you can configure these using PowerShell, and here are the commands. I'll just review how to do it on my VM. Okay, so to configure SMB, you should open up PowerShell as an administrator. And this is just typing in a few commands. So if you want to view all the configurations, you type get SMB server configuration. And then this will show you a list of all the different settings for SMB. And the two specific settings that I've done on this presentation are encrypt data and disabling SMB1. This is because you, of course, want to encrypt all the data. And also SMB1 is outdated and pretty insecure. So to do this, you just have to type set-smb server configuration encrypt data. And then remember, for Boolean values, you need to type in a $sign before. So true, and then that's false. I spelled it wrong. Oh yeah, I did. Okay. And then we do the same for the other setting, which is going to be disabling SMB1. Um, so you do the same thing, but now you set the setting to false. Okay, and the way we found these settings was, um, okay, so I found these settings through the Microsoft documentation again. If you're unsure about like some setting you find online, if it's consistent with the documentation, there's a very high chance that it's the right thing to do. Okay, next one is IIS. Um, so what are some basic things we can do to secure IIS? Um, One hint I'm gonna give is just gonna be to configure or enable SSL. So you can research how to do that, and then this one is probably gonna take a bit longer. So I'll give you 5 minutes again. Okay. So for IAS, we went over some of these settings last time. So the first thing is to just set all the application pools to application pool identity for identity. Uh, I'm going to share my VM again. Okay, if you haven't already, you should install or enable all of the IIS features so you can actually open up IIS Manager. So the first thing we're going to do is set up all the application pools. So to do this, you go onto each of these, you right click it, go to advanced settings, and you change this identity value to application pool identity. You can find a bunch of these other settings on sys benchmarks. If you want to know like what specific things you should do. The next thing we're going to do is enable logging. So if we go to our website, need to make sure that this right here, this setting says disable. If it says enable, you should click on it to enable logging. And this last thing we're going to do is turn on SSL. And if you haven't like set up SSL with your certificate and such, if you go to SSL settings, this box is going to be unchecked and it's going to be grayed out. That's because SSL isn't actually installed. So you need to first add an SSL binding. So you should go to your server, go to server certificates, and then to create a certificate, you go here, create self-signed certificate. Wait. Yeah. And then you can create whatever certificate you want. Now we have to add this as a binding. So if you go to the website, under bindings, SSL is going to be HTTPS. So of course we already have it, but if you want to add it, change this to HTTPS, make sure it's port 443, and then select the certificate that you just created. So now that you have SSL in your site, you need to enable it, which we did before. And that's to go to SSL settings and then check the require SSL. Okay. Last thing we're gonna do is registry or configure the Active Directory. So once again, this is just gonna be some very basic settings. Well, first for IIS, the way we found like how to do all of these things is like, again, you can use the Microsoft documentation. Everything else you can just Google. And before you do something, make sure that it stays consistent with other sources to make sure it's correct. Otherwise, like most sources will be fine, but just make sure to double check so you don't screw up your computer. Okay, the last service is going to be Active Directory. So what are some basic things we can do to harden this service? Okay, I'm just gonna wrap this up now. Um, so for Active Directory, two things we can do are to disable the guest account, and we can also enforce the default domain policy. Once again, I got these from the Microsoft documentation. I'll just quickly demonstrate how to do these. Okay, so to disable guest, if you go to Active Directory users and computers, and you go to users, you will see the guest account, and you will disable this just like disabling your guest account in your actual computer. And you just press wherever it says right here, it should say disable account if it hasn't been disabled yet. So you should disable the guest account. And then the next thing I demonstrated last week or 2 weeks ago. So first open up group policy management. And if you go to default domain policy, if it says no for enforced, you should right click it and then make sure enforce is selected. Okay, so those were the last settings. So here's a summary of what we did today. Again, to research these kind of services, you can just Google them. And then you need to make sure you're pretty familiar with the service so you know like what you're configuring. And to make sure that everything you're Googling is consistent, you should make sure that everything is found in like 2 or 3 sources to make sure that it's correct. All right, that's it.